Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. In May of 1978, electronic music legends Kraftwerk released The Robots. It's a model of the band's hypnotic rhythm and sparse lyrics. And if you listen carefully, there's an AppSec message in, "We are programmed just to do anything you want us to." Which means this week we talk with Lynn Marks from Imperva about bad bots, their behavior, and their business impact. Then in the news segment, Azure gets extra replica, Chrome diminishes document.domain, Go gets more fuzzing, Microsoft races a message bus, and more. Charge your batteries and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
SUSE.io makes security tools for everyone. SUSE's flat rate pricing means you can set up SCA and DAST tools for your whole team. No seat counts, no scan limits, and you never have to talk to a salesperson. SUSE integrates with all common CI/CD platforms and supports most popular package managers. And thanks to SUSE's open source vulnerability scanner, license management suite, and SBOM generation capability, you can get back to what you really want to be doing, coding in no time. Visit securityweekly.com/SUSE.
This is episode 195, recorded May 2nd, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
It's more fun to compute. How are you, Mike?
Grab your pocket calculator and maybe we'll squeeze in a cover at the end of the episode. While you're grabbing that, if anybody out there has a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows, whether it's Kraftwerk or not, submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Then join Paul Asadorian and Rich Mogul on May 4th to learn how to choose the right architecture for your application, because you don't want to be highlighted here on "we take your security seriously" when there's a breach. And so if you want to learn about the right architecture for your app, you will go listen as a live attendee, because you also have a chance to win a $100 Hacker Warehouse gift card. Register at securityweekly.com/webcasts. Plus, don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Lynn Marks is a skilled product manager with more than 10 years of experience in R&D and B2B product management. Previously, she was product manager at Model N and Distilled Networks, acquired by Imperva, where she oversaw the product roadmap and innovation. At Imperva, she manages advanced bot protection, client-side protection, and works closely with customers to solve complex business challenges. Hello, Lynn. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to skip the Voight Conf tests and make sure that you're, are you a bot or not, a replicant or not, and maybe just talk about what the bots themselves do. So we're talking about bots, and there are good bots out there. There's bad bots out there. And of course, I think we want to talk about what the bad bots are. But rather than just saying they're bad and kind of ending there, that seems rather boring. What makes bots bad? Or, why are we caring about bots in this from this perspective?
That is a great question. So, first of all, in the last year, we have noticed a trend where bad bot traffic continues to rise and become more complex. So, in the last year, out of all global traffic, we've seen that 27.7% of that traffic was actually made up of bad bots. So it's crazy to think that over 25% of all global traffic is actually made up of these bad bots, taking up bandwidth and also taking any of the products or other things that customers might actually want to do legitimately on your websites. Now, these bad bots can really have a negative impact on organizations across industries. So, of course, they can impact your revenue and your bottom line. They can also end up impacting your customer satisfaction, which can end up leading to customer churn. And as you can imagine, if you have a lot of bots hitting your infrastructure, you can also end up having performance issues, downtime, and also increased infrastructure costs. So bad bots, which are really becoming so much more prevalent and are hitting almost every different type of organization can really end up having an impact on not only the security teams, but also every other department across organizations as well.
So there's some things I'd love to pick apart there, because you touched on a couple aspects that I think engineers will immediately respond to. They're taking up bandwidth, taking up hitting latency, causing performance impacts right there. Things that SREs are going to be paying attention to. But we're not actually getting into, I don't think we need to get into the aspect of just a pure distributed denial of service from a bot. There's things that are more interesting at the application layer that you started to touch on a little bit. I'd love to hear more about, in the sense of what they're doing in terms of that non-legitimate traffic, or they're basically abusing workflows that are intended for humans. They're just doing it at a higher rate, perhaps. Things like fraud or interesting ways that they're targeting resources. So rather than just, if we imagine, I'm a ticket master or that type of company that wants to prevent scalpers from getting, all the Kraftwerk concert tickets that are coming out over the summer. There's a lot of other types of scenarios that these bots can impact on the business logic or business workflows, if you will. What are some of those that you've seen over the past year or so?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's really what makes bad bots so hard to catch. It's because they are actually using your applications or your websites or APIs as you actually intended legitimate users to do it, but they're trying to do something nefarious on there. So in the last year, what we've seen is the top attack is account takeover. So that means that they're either testing the validity of a lot of different credentials, or they're actually taking over specific accounts and are able to do other nefarious or fraudulent activities on those accounts that they've taken over. The other two types of most common attacks that we've seen are content or price scraping, as well as scalping, or another name you might have heard for it is inventory hoarding. And these are consistently the top three types of bot attacks that we're seeing hitting applications. And it really is hitting any application or website where you can think of where they could have a login page, where they might have interesting information, whether it's about their customers or about the products that they actually provide, or for any e-commerce site, if you have products that bots and their operators can resell, then that makes you a target for these top three types of bot attacks.
Yeah, I think there's also that aspect of just outright fraud, I'm going to guess, too, in the sense of trying to make money off of compromised credit cards. So how do we, you touched on that a little bit, saying here's inventory that as the attacker, then we can resell. One of the best ways to resell stolen credit cards is through gift cards, for example. And so that's just another endpoint that attackers can go after in broad, at high volume is the word I'm going for there, just to resell these cards. So we've got a lot of interesting things beyond just the account takeover. When there's also the aspect then, of course, we understand what the problem is. We want to defend ourselves. The classic defense probably that everyone in the world has seen are the CAPTCHAs. So as you're talking with customers and they're either, they're worrying about the impact of bots, they're trying to figure out how to counter them, how much and how often are they still talking about the user experience and trying to be friendly to us humans that are hitting those applications and trying to avoid just something as simple as CAPTCHAs? And maybe the other way of asking that more succinctly is, can we ever get rid of CAPTCHAs because they're just such a pain, right?
Yeah, so a comfortable and frictionless user experience is definitely one of the top two things that we consistently hear from customers. The first thing, of course, is they want a solution that can provide them with good efficacy and can actually bring visibility and mitigate these bad bots. But then, of course, they don't want to take that at the expense of having their actual users having a bad experience. So it's definitely still a top concern for our customers. Now, many of our customers still believe that CAPTCHA is a mitigation that they will still need to keep on using, because they might have other stakeholders within the organization that maybe don't want the additional risk, let's say, of false positives, and don't want to outright block customers. So let's say for our products, where we assign like a risk level for each different type of request that we see, let's say for high confidence requests that we see, a lot of our customers, I think 91% of our customers, they said block for that. With, some other ones are setting CAPTCHA. And then for the medium risk or medium confidence logins, that's usually where we'll see them still setting something like a CAPTCHA. So, they do believe that blocking outright is the best way to go when you have high confidence. But when it is a page or an application where it could be more sensitive or can really impact the user experience and what they're able to do on it, they sometimes might want to continue using CAPTCHA for those login attempts or requests where we're not entirely sure if it is a bot or not. And they just want that extra vote of confidence that a CAPTCHA is able to bring.
Sure. And you're mentioning there too about the different sensitivity of the type of pages, call them just resources, API endpoints, what have you, that an attacker might target. Curious, how much monitoring have you seen application owners put into their apps, put into their products to actually identify when bots are happening? Because I can guess that on the aspect of account takeovers, everybody, especially security orgs, security teams, are going to be thinking of, we want to make sure we have strong controls on our login page because that's the obvious sensitive spot. But when you start to get into other parts of the application, it might not be self-evident, or maybe the security org isn't the one that's necessarily has the monitoring to identify this bot behavior. So maybe give us some insights or some advice on, or maybe just some stories, if you will, about when do orgs discover that they're actually being attacked by these bots, or there's bad bot behavior being used against their site.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, there's a lot of really sensitive pages or paths that are important to have additional monitoring on. And I think that you bring up a really important point, because it's really having that visibility or monitoring in place that allows you to understand what is your baseline. And if that baseline starts to change, maybe there's something weird going on with bots or fraud being conducted. So we've definitely seen that a majority of security practitioners have some monitoring or visibility into the general traffic for the more sensitive sites. So like the login page or the credit card page or maybe the gift card page. But we've definitely also seen examples where there are other metrics that can be indicative of bad bots hitting the applications or fraud occurring on the applications that aren't actually being monitored by the fraud team, by the security team, but are being monitored by other teams like the fraud team or the marketing team or e-commerce teams. An example of this is a beauty e-commerce website. And this website was being hit by carding attacks, where the bots were trying to validate if credit cards that they found online were actually valid. And the way that they do this is that they make a lot of small purchases on the website with each of the credit cards. And then, of course, for the ones that are valid, they can buy bigger purchases with them. And what's really interesting about this case is that it wasn't actually the security team that realized that these attacks and fraud were occurring on the site, but it was the finance team that came to the security team when they realized that they were having a big increase in their chargeback fees. So, if customers say, hey, this was a fraudulent charge, the credit card provider goes to the website where this charge was made, and they have a chargeback fee on that website. So it was that metric of, how much chargeback fees is the customer actually seeing that led to this organization realizing that they were having bots hitting their carding path.
Nice. And I like that example because it definitely highlights the aspect that these bot attacks don't have to be volumetric in the sense of the big old DDoS that you need to drop, a CDN or one of those, kind of countermeasures in there where it's just how many packets can we stuff through. It can be, in this case, maybe low and slow because that rhymes, or at least slow enough not to look like necessarily quote unquote bad traffic until the chargeback starts to hit. So is that, are there other aspects of the bot themselves, the behaviors that they use to obscure their own behavior, meaning this low and slow aspect, or the idea that I think we can in this century, in this decade, we could definitely get beyond just looking at a single IP address, because it's easy to change with cloud service providers, malware that takes over home networks, things like that. So what are some of these behaviors that bots take advantage of that are making it harder for end users just to distinguish between human versus script?
Definitely. So, I mean, you touched upon like one example that's often said, where it's these more evasive and advanced bots are, let's say, cycling through IPs. And as they're cycling through them, if they're really trying to evade detection, they might only do 1, 2, 3 requests with HIP before switching to the next one. So, if you are trying to use just simple rules to block IPs when you're seeing these bots, that's going to be like a long whack-a-mole game for you. We've seen a lot of other techniques that bots are using. Let's say they're mimicking user agents that they know customers might, like real customers might use. We've actually seen that the Safari mobile user agent is being more commonly seen because in the last year or two, Apple has released a lot more privacy functionality. And because of this more push towards privacy, it has allowed bots to take advantage of that. And by hiding behind the mobile Safari user agent, they're able to not have to give up as much of their information because of these privacy pushes that Apple has made.
Yeah, that's that unfortunate tension between minimizing universal tracking and persistent tracking, and then bots taking advantage of that. So that's always I think we're still pro-privacy here, and then the idea to try to target those bots and defeat them in different manners. I'm curious is maybe we could start shifting to that aspect of just how do we deal with the bots. So we talked briefly about CAPTCHAs, but as developers are building their applications, what are some of the things that they can keep in mind? And we touched a little bit already just on the idea of just monitoring at the application layer, or monitoring for things that are impactful, like chargebacks, where does the money go? But I'm curious if there are others, or what sort of area do you see developers try to do to harden their own systems?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most important things you should do first and foremost is getting visibility, like you just said. And you really have to have a good catalog of all the different assets that you need to protect from bad bots and other malicious actors. And you also have to have a good understanding, not only what those assets are, but what is their typical behavior. So let's say, what is their typical rate per second of usage, or what is the typical geography of the users that are accessing that application or website? Because you really need to know, what does typical behavior look like in order for you to understand, hey, is this trend being thrown off? So I think that is a very important first step for developers to make. I think a second thing, obviously you're probably going to predict I'm going to say this. If you do see that you're being impacted by bad bots or unexpected spikes in your critical pages, it would probably be good for you to implement a dedicated bot solution. Because what ends up happening is if you are trying to solve these more persistent and advanced attacks by yourself, you often end up spending more time and money trying to develop a solution yourself, or trying to whack-a-mole block these bots, while having a dedicated solution can do that for you. Now, I can give also a couple of recommendations that are a little more on the technical side. So, one thing that is really important, make sure that you implement an audit trail, both for your infrastructure and for your application and APIs. So this will help you understand, who exactly is accessing it, where are they accessing it from, and if you are seeing weird behaviors all of a sudden, then that is a great way for you to use the audit trail. I think it's also really important for developers to understand what kind of compliance frameworks their industry or their organization needs to adhere to, and make sure that they have a really good understanding of what kind of recommendations those compliance frameworks give them, and really follow them as much as they can. So, an example is if you are an organization that is processing credit cards, it would be really important for you to have a good understanding of, let's say, what recommendations the PCI framework provides, and being able to add and implement their suggestions as much as possible. I guess the last one is related to network security. So make sure that you're only giving access to your assets to only the IPs or geographies that really need to have access to your assets. And don't just use like a blanket statement for each one of these different assets that you do have and need to protect. Make sure that you do a careful analysis of exactly who and from when and how often it should be accessed, and make sure to limit the access to anyone who does not fall in those parameters.
So Lynn, I'm sort of curious. So I think it's interesting how we're sort of walking backwards, but walking into it's like, okay, a developer can do so much by themselves. And then, as you were saying, they have to get involved with both the compliance team as well as your risk management team and things like that. From your point of view with the customers you're working with, large and small, at what point does it make sense for them to say, okay, we've done enough of this, trying to play whack-a-mole ourselves, and actually let's go and talk to Imperva or someone else out there and actually find a managed solution for this? Is that more of a is it based off of I'm guessing it's some sort of combination of both the value of whatever the property is they're trying to protect, but does it come down to, is it just purely like a revenue number, or is it off of amount of traffic, or when do you think people should start thinking about sort of as a maturity model of bot management? How about that?
I think, like you said, it has to do with what kind of assets you're trying to protect, and like how much incentive do the bot operators have to continue hitting your site. So let's say if you're a fairly small site, maybe don't get a lot of traffic, don't have a lot of credit card purchases going through it, and like if you see maybe like one random attack, like maybe it's not going to be your biggest concern yet to actually go and implement a dedicated solution. But if you are an organization where, let's say, you do have a decent amount of revenue that could be getting hit, or if you have data that could be considered very sensitive, like someone in the healthcare industry where they have really important like healthcare data, which could be compliant under HIPAA, and making sure that those don't get exposed. I think those definitely will push an organization more to want to implement a more secure bot solution. And I think it also has to do with how persistent of an attack it is, and how much like resources, both from a monetary perspective and from a personnel perspective, you actually have to spend to try to mitigate that solution. So like I mentioned earlier, if you do see a lot of bot attacks, you could actually end up having performance issue, or you can have infrastructure costs. So if those infrastructure costs start really bringing your bottom line down, that could be a good business decision for the organization to want to have a dedicated solution, where even though the solution, of course, is going to cost money, it could actually end up saving you money in the long run by maybe not having to spend additional money on infrastructure. Or if you are seeing a lot of, let's say, attacks where you're then having to deal with credit cards being stolen or fraudulent purchases being made on your application, you might have additional support costs, or your your support costs, or your NOC team, or even the team that is responsible for customer relations might end up having additional work and time being spent on this. So you really have to look at all of the different costs that can add up from not having bot attacks, and looking at the bottom line for how much those costs can end up eroding the bottom line. And when that cost is large enough, or if you believe that that cost will get large enough, that's really when it's time for you to have a bot solution in place.
Because what's interesting is the sort of, as you've been talking, is this isn't, even if, grab, I'm guessing the most expensive version of your product, but feel free to correct me. It's not a silver bullet, right? It's still, you can't just drop it and go, we're done. There's still, like you mentioned, you have to get, in some cases, at least a capture solution as well. Or so it's still, it's going to require focus and intention, and not just like, you mentioned, I think you mentioned PCI, where for a lot of us, if you want to get around code reviews and that type of thing in PCI, I'd be like, throw a WAF in front and you're done. But this is still, that's just one part of it, and there's still more work to be done for you or for a customer.
Yeah, definitely. I think, what's important to remember is that bot solutions are going to definitely bring visibility to all or the majority of bots, and they're going to help you mitigate. But it really is also up to your organization as you are configuring and actually managing these solutions to make sure that you are configuring the solutions in a way that the solution understands what are the important assets for your organization, so that the solution can best protect it. Whether you're creating path-specific rules, you might want to be more strict on your login page than another page, because that might be the first place where attackers can hit you. And that could, mean you might want to have additional detections on there, or you might want to implement more strict mitigation options. So I think bot solutions are, really the best way to deal with bots. And they're going to bring you a lot of ways to make that easier for you to protect them. But there is still some configuration that is involved from your team in order to make sure that they can really best bring you the value and best protect your unique use case.
Yeah. What I hear from that too, as you and John are discussing that, is that there's perhaps a call of responsibility or a good call to action for the AppSec team to do some threat modeling that focuses on business workflows, or that's threat modeling that's oriented towards what are these sensitive workflows, as opposed to threat modeling that's just walking through the OWASP top 10. Where can we maybe have, are we going to have SQL injection? Are we going to have cross-site scripting? Because I think focusing on the OWASP top 10 doesn't get you into those insights that you were saying near the end there, Lynn, about what's the context of your app. And even if you don't have something that's directly e-commerce, you might still have an app that has some constrained resources like appointments, right? And if somebody, if a bot goes out and pulls out all the appointments, and so that your legitimate customers can't get them, you now have a customer support issue, a customer happiness issue that that's one of those things that you touched on as well. So that I think that's where my mind is going, in the sense of how do we also look at these applications so we have better insights into what they're doing rather than just purely how they're coded. And I'm not sure there's a question hidden in there. I was trying to turn it around to a question, but maybe I'll try to pull a question out of there for you, Lynn, in the sense of just what are some different ways you've seen perhaps just organizations be surprised that they didn't realize that they were going to have a bot problem? Maybe that kind of touches on that they forgot to do some of that context-specific threat modeling or something like that.
Yeah. I think one interesting use case that we saw was a higher education site based in the US. So this was a university where it was a community college. So their end users were able to enroll and apply to this college. And because it is a community college, there isn't as much restrictions for who can actually apply. And what they ended up seeing is fraud and abuse was occurring on their site, because when a person in the US registers for a university, they usually get a .edu email address. And many organizations give discounts or free products to consumers with a .edu email address because they believe that maybe students have less money, or they want to be able to get them more familiar with the brand when they are younger. So what this organization was seeing is that they were actually having a really high amount of fake accounts being created on their website, because it allowed these scammers to then be able to get discounts and other free products because they had these accounts. And for this specific for this specific use case, we actually saw, just in 3 days, we saw 500,000 bots hitting their account creation page. So really a crazy amount of bots hitting them. And it not only caused a lot of issues, from the fraud side, but they also ended up having skewed analytics and increased marketing costs. And they didn't really have a good understanding of how many students they should actually expect in the next school year. So, this is an example where, it might not be as obvious at the beginning to think of it, but when you realize at what kind of, valuable products or, value you can get by creating an account from this service, it really shows that, bots and their operators will really think of any way that they can abuse websites and applications, and they will take advantage of them.
Yeah, that's fun, clever thinking is sort of the second order effect of just having not direct fraud against that service, against a community college, but then reusing that against others. And it sounds like, you mentioned marketing budget, mentioned before, chargebacks. So I suppose the other call to action for AppSec security teams out there is to pay attention to budgets and see how they're getting skewed, how they're going off. Because I'm going to imagine too, just as a quick callback to that, the latency and performance aspect, the idea of clouds are elastic. They can grow to handle all kinds of spikes in traffic. But if you're spinning up more EC2 instances, spinning up more Lambdas to deal with, 500,000 accounts that are trying to sign up, you're also just spending money on a lot of cloud computing that you probably didn't need to do.
Definitely. I think it's also really important for developers. You mentioned the OWASP top 10. I don't know if you all know, but there's actually an OWASP top automated attacks. So they have a list of 21 automated attacks, which list out all the different ways that bots can impact your website and application. And I think familiarizing yourself with these different vulnerabilities is a really good way to help you catalyze all the different assets and how each one of your assets could be vulnerable to bots as well.
I think that's the second time so far this year that I've been surprised by how busy OWASP is and a new list that it wasn't on my mind. So thank you for that. I'm going to have to go peek at that. Lynn, any final parting thoughts from you is either about good bots or bad bots to send us off with?
Yeah, I think what's really important to remember is that as more and more organizations are bringing more assets online and providing more experiences that their end users can do online, bad bot traffic and more sophisticated bad bots are going to continue to rise. And really no industry is immune from this. So I think it's really important for every organization to have a look at what kind of assets they have, how vulnerable they can be to these bad bot attacks. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about solutions and how your organization can be impacted by a good bad bot management solution, you can go to imperva.com, where we have a lot more information and case studies, and we'll give you more information about the solutions that we offer.
Perfect. Thanks very much for joining us, Lynn. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Also want to thank John for joining us this session, as always, and everybody who's hanging out. As mentioned, to learn more about Imperva, visit securityweekly.com/Imperva, because these bots don't feel pity, remorse, or fear. But we feel like we need to take a quick break and return with news of the week.